Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Collaborative Science for Stories webinar series. This is Nick Sobral with the Science Collaborative. Today's webinar is our third entry in our Collaborative Science Conversation series, which we co-host with NOAA's Restore Science program. We've just got a couple quick housekeeping items, and then I'll pass it on to our two moderators to run us through today's discussion and setting the stage and all that good stuff. So just a couple quick housekeeping items. All attendees are muted on entry, so you can use the Q&A feature to give us questions, and only the organizers can see them. So just make sure you enter them in as they occur to you throughout the webinar. We'll save some time at the end for questions, but you can make sure you just pop them in whatever as they occur to you throughout the webinar. You can also use that to alert us if you have any technical issues. So we've got lots of Science Collaborative staff standing by to help you with your technical issues if they do pop up. I see that GoToWebinar at some point in the last couple of weeks added a couple new features and things. So if you are having some issues, it's probably not you, it's probably them. So just feel free to enter them in. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's moderators and turn it over to them to lead our discussion. So Caitlin Young is the science coordinator for the NOAA Restore Science program. She leads the science program's efforts to synthesize environmental and human dimensions research data available for the Gulf of Mexico to design funding competitions. She has a background in geochemistry and has researched the impacts of submarine groundwater discharge on coastal ecosystems. And Doug George is a geological oceanographer and a familiar face with our webinar series, as always. Great to have you here, Doug, and the program manager for the NERRS Science Collaborative. He has worked throughout the West Coast as a federal scientist, state resource manager, and environmental consultant with projects ranging from estuary restoration and living shorelines to regional sediment management and climate change adaptation. And with that, I'm going to get out of the way and leave it to Doug and Caitlin to run us through today's session. Thanks, folks.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for that intro, Nick. So my name is Caitlin Young, and I am the science coordinator for the NOAA Restore Science program. The NOAA Restore Science program is a program that invests Clean Water Act penalty funds from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill to learn more about the Gulf of Mexico's living coastal and marine resources and to connect this knowledge to resource management within the region. The science program has already supported about $50 million in new research and application and expects to invest another $6 million or so each year in the next 2 decades. By exploring the connections between different parts of the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem and prioritizing science that applies to natural resource management decisions, the science program is supporting the sustainability of the Gulf and its coastal communities. The science program runs workshops across the Gulf of Mexico to bring natural resource managers and researchers together to learn how to produce the science that's really needed to reduce uncertainty around the natural resource management decisions that we have to make every day on the ground here in the Gulf of Mexico. And we find that investing in collaborative science is much more likely to lead to the research findings and products that align with the decisions that the resource managers are having to make. And we've conducted about 5 competitions so far. We have some really great projects that are putting information into managers' hands. For example, we have a project team that uses weather radar data to track migratory songbirds and surveys coastal habitats. That provides natural resource managers with information they need to identify and conserve critical songbird habitat. We have another project that has developed a new online tool, and it's being used to provide recommendations on shoreline best management practices and options for implementing shorelines to protect property and coastal natural resources. And that project has really expanded from the east coast of the US and Virginia to Louisiana, and that's getting great traction. And so finally, one of the projects that we funded really early on provides coastal managers with information on how seagrasses respond to hurricanes. And that's how we first started working with Dr. Kelly Darnell, who is one of our speakers here today. So I want to give a short intro to Kelly and let her kind of speak on her collaborative experience. So Dr. Kelly Darnell is the interim director of the Gulf Coast Research Laboratory and faculty at University of Southern Mississippi's Division of Coastal Sciences. She's a coastal ecologist, and her research focuses on the biology and ecology of seagrass ecosystems. Dr. Darnell frequently collaborates with natural resource managers to ensure that the results of her research can be applied in the management, conservation, and restoration decision-making. She has a bachelor's in biology from Wittenberg University, a master's in marine science from University of South Alabama, and a PhD in marine science from University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Darnell is also the director of the Mississippi-based Restore X Center of Excellence, and that's a $25 million research grant program with the mission of understanding the stressors on Gulf of Mexico ecosystems. to facilitate sustainable use of natural resources. And she is also the president of the Gulf Estuarine Research Society, and that's a professional society whose goal is to promote the research in the Gulf of Mexico. The Restore Science program first funded Dr. Darnell in 2017 to conduct a Gulf-wide assessment of habitat use and habitat-specific production on nectin in seagrass beds. Through that project, I was able to see Dr. Darnell adapt her sampling plans in real time to meet the needs of resource managers in 3 different Gulf of Mexico states. And through the duration of Kelly's work on that project, she was really responsive to the needs of the resource managers. She developed specific modeling outputs for each of the different states, and she added more resource managers to her project when the scope of the project expanded. When the Hurricane Michael hit the panhandle of Florida, Kelly realized that she had this really unique opportunity to learn about the response and recovery of seagrass beds to hurricane impacts. So she approached us at the science program to see if we could help fund a before and after control impact study on that site in Florida, because that site had been sampled just before the hurricane. And so we did fund that work, additional work, and Kelly was able to show how the hurricane initially impacted these seagrass beds and the composition of the plants there. But within a year, the estuarine seagrass communities had rebounded, and then the associated nectin communities had also rebounded. And so this really helped the resource managers understand that seagrass beds can be quite resilient to the long-term effects of a powerful Cat 5 hurricane. And so I asked Kelly to be part of this webinar today because I've observed her consistently employing the values and practices of collaborative science, both on her on-the-ground research and then also as the director of Mississippi's Restore Center of Excellence. So thanks so much, Kelly, for agreeing to come and speak with us today. And I'd love for you to tell us a bit more about your path to collaborative science.
Of course. Thank you for that introduction, Caitlin, and also for those kind words. That long list makes me think that I need to start saying no to things. But in terms of my path to collaborative science, it really started in graduate school. So in graduate school, I had some opportunities through participation at conferences and workshops and other meetings to meet some natural resource managers. In addition to the conferences and the workshop and the meeting itself, what I especially enjoyed was the time that we had during meals and then afterwards to socialize and to really talk and get to know one another. And it was during this time that I realized we had a lot of overlapping interests, so professionally, but also personally. And in these conversations, one thing that I consistently heard was that there was this, really kind of this unmet need for more data that the managers' agencies just didn't have the time or the resources or the money to collect, but they really found would be necessary to inform their decision making and answer the questions that they had. So proceeded through graduate school, and after graduation and after a postdoc, and when I got a faculty position, I spent some time really thinking about what I wanted my research and my career to look like. And I decided a couple of things. One, I wanted to collaborate with people that I enjoyed working with, so work would always be fun. And that 2, I wanted to do research that I really enjoyed and that was interesting, but that could also solve a problem. So that brought me back to thinking about the managers who I had talked with when I was a graduate student, and resulted in me reaching out to them and forming these collaborations and these partnerships, which in some cases have lasted more than 10 years now to today. So thank you for having me.
So yeah, welcome, Kelly, and thank you, Caitlin, for introducing the Restore program. For everyone out there, I'm Doug George. I'm the NERRS Science Collaborative Program Manager, as Nick said, and really happy to have all of you here as well. So thank you for joining us. I want to say a few things about the Science Collaborative and the NERRS program before I introduce a couple more panelists. The NERRS is a national network of now 30 unique research reserves, and we're in the process of adding additional ones. Louisiana is coming next, so we're excited about that. But currently, We have around 1.3 million acres that are protected across the entire nation. It's a NOAA program, and it works in collaboration with a local or place-based partner, and that could either be a state agency or a university or, in one case so far, a nonprofit. And each site is, each reserve site, sorry, includes programs that are focused on land stewardship, research and scientific monitoring, training programs for the public and local officials, and education. So what we refer to as the different sectors. And this NERRS Science Collaborative, this program that I manage, is supports the science for the estuarine and coastal decision makers. And we coordinate regular funding opportunities and support user-based collaborative research, assessment and transfer activities that address critical coastal management needs that the reserves themselves tell us that they would like to explore and do research. The Science Collaborative is currently managed by the University of Michigan's Water Center through a cooperative agreement with NOAA, which is how we have all these amazing people like Nick and some behind the scenes folks who make all these webinars flow very, very smoothly. So thank you to all of you out there. So the research that the program supports is very highly collaborative. That's the purpose of it. And we integrate what we're calling intended users into the research process to create the products along the way that, or to inform the products that are going to support coastal management at the end of a project. Although we really understand a lot of these projects then have a ripple onto another project. And similarly with the Restore program projects that Caitlin, that the Restore program funds, there's always a rippling effect from these collaborative science type projects. So as you know, we're excited to continue our partnership with the Restore program. This is our third installment of doing what we're calling our collaborative science conversations. We have a YouTube channel, and maybe we could get that link dropped in the chat, where you can go back and revisit on our playlist the previous two conversations that we had over the last 2 years. So we're doing this annual event, so keep coming back every year. We're gonna have another conversation next year. So with that, I'm going to introduce a couple more panelists before I disappear for a little bit and let them have a conversation. So our first one I'm going to introduce is Chris Peter, and Chris has been he's been with us with the reserve system for a while. So I'll let him introduce a few parts about himself too. But we invited Chris to be part of the panel for a couple different reasons. He's been part of several collaborative science projects that we've supported over the years. I should mention he's in Wells, Maine, and let us know sort of, we heard of Kelly's pathway, but what's your pathway? And so happy to have you here and join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the great introduction. I didn't want to be on camera while you were introducing me because I was too busy blushing. Even my shirt is probably blushing right now, looks like. But I appreciate the time and the audience. And a lot of that is very true. Even the Wells thing in Maine. I don't work at Wells, Maine, but I do work at Great Bay, but I have for maybe like 10 years as a partner at a university, partnering on a lot of projects. So I'm very close to Wells. They have a special place in my heart. I guess looking back to like my evolution into collaborative science is really when I was part of a proposal that was written, and in the middle of writing it, or actually when we submitted it, I took another job, and I took a job from academia into the NERRS system, the National Estuary Research Reserve system, and I really didn't understand, I didn't really immerse myself in collaborative science, and that was a great way to immerse yourself, is to basically get on a collaborative science project, but also immerse yourself in a new position that is NOAA based, which is a really big focus for NOAA. So I got to really jump right in head first on a really awesome regional project. I see one of my partners is on the call, also with the same name, and that kind of just led me down the pathway of like learning with some of these awesome people like Chris Ford that was on these projects, and my manager Corey Ryle and some other people, and just learning as I went, and I learned pretty quickly, and that really opened my eyes. Coming from an academic lab where there's all researchers and going into a National Western Research Reserve system where there's different focuses and not just research, but there's education and there's outreach to towns, and then there's land management, and you can see all these different applications of these science coming to play. Also really lent myself into immersing into collaborative science. So now, well, rewinding back, I didn't really think about the process and the time and the staff and the products as much, and now I really focus much more time to it. Went from a regional project to a national project, and just steamrolled into a big process of getting feedback on all of these products that we're putting together, and we're still in the current process of doing that. So it's really exciting to be down this path, because I'm hoping that people can learn or at least get a bad joke or two out of my timeline in this process. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, bad jokes are always welcome. We greatly appreciate that. Our third panelist that I'm going to introduce is Julie Gonzalez. And Julie Gonzalez is a PhD candidate at UC Davis, University of California, Davis, go Aggies. And, and she's a current NOAA Margaret A. Davidson Fellow with the San Francisco Bay NERRS, National Estuarine Research Reserve. And she's interested in estuarine community ecology and how to improve coastal habitat restoration and assessment, facilitating collaborative development of research projects and considering multi-stakeholder perceptions in the process. She's been involved in a lot of restoration projects over the last 8 years from in California and Oregon, and as a research scientist and former Sea Grant Fellow and project manager with the State Coastal Conservancy here in California. We were really excited to invite Julie to be part of today's panel because for a couple of reasons. One, Julie is in this early phase, and she's really demonstrated her career and demonstrated really clearly her interest in collaborative science and being exposed to something that most of us in our early years of academia are not exposed to. And she's grabbed onto it and really charged far with it. And at the same time, she's learned how to navigate the NOAA system a little bit as a fellow and the NERRS Science Collaborative. So very excited just for that development of fostering a new scientist coming into our larger community across the estuarine and coastal community. We also, if you notice, we've kind of triangulated around the nation. We've got Florida, we've got the Northeast, and now we've got the West Coast. So we wanted to broaden our perspectives across the nation and include someone from out here on the West Coast, because it helps to hear how other parts of the country are doing things, and that learn in the similarities and as well as some of those differences and how those could be played out locally. So Julie's also been just a joy to work with. I'm right here at the San Francisco Bay NERRS myself, right next to it, and so it's been great to kind of see her research just really making a difference right here locally in our backyard here. So Julie, you're our last one to come along and tell us about your pathway. And while you're starting to do that, I just want to make a quick plug for the Margaret A. Davidson Fellowship. If we could get that link dropped in. We are actively recruiting our third cohort. Julie was part of our first, and so we're excited to now be going into our third one. So if you're a graduate student or know of one and interested in a 2-year fellowship, take a look at that while Julie starts to tell us her story.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks. That was such a nice introduction. I'm really happy to be on this panel, especially along with Chris and Kelly, and hear a little bit about what they have to say about their experiences with collaborative research too, given that I am pretty early career and feel like I can learn a lot. But my experience in particular, so I started getting interested in collaboration during my master's, where I worked with a nonprofit group doing cordgrass restoration here in San Francisco Bay. And at this point, I feel like I was kind of doing collaborative research. My research question was meant to address some of the concerns that the folks doing cordgrass restoration had. So, you know, we collaborated a little bit in the beginning as I was developing my research question, but, and I gave a couple of presentations during and after the research was complete, but that's about it. And then after that, as Doug mentioned, I did a Sea Grant Fellowship with the California Coastal Conservancy, where I acted as a collaborator, but wasn't really involved in designing the collaborative process itself. And it was really during my PhD at UC Davis where I started collaborating with intention. And I think that's really a key distinction, that intentionality and building collaboration into the research rather than thinking about it as a separate thing. So at this point, I was a Margaret A. Davidson Fellow, as Doug mentioned, with the San Francisco Bay NERRS. And as part of that application process, which I think if you click that link, you'll see more about, I worked closely with the research coordinator there to come up with a project and project outputs that directly address their management needs. And they collaborate regularly with several local groups, so I also learned a lot from them about the collaborative process. But what really solidified it for me was my experience as a technical lead on a neuroscience collaborative project, working with the South Slough NERRS in Oregon, Portland State University, and several other stakeholder groups in Oregon to understand what scientists and the general public value about estuaries and estuarine restoration, and whether those values are captured by what scientists are measuring to evaluate restoration success. So for this project, effective collaboration was a key goal from the beginning. We developed a detailed plan for our collaborative process that included gathering a group of key end users several times a year to get feedback at critical time points. We went back and forth on research questions and project deliverables that would benefit each group that we worked with. The process was more communicative, where we would get feedback and incorporate that feedback. And because of that, the project deliverables were being used by these groups almost immediately after the project was finished. So I'd consider myself an early career scientist and just kind of getting started, but I feel like I'm in it, and I'm convinced that it's a super effective process that's worth the extra time and effort.
Well, thank you for that in self-description of your own pathways. And Caitlin and I are going to take a step back and now let the three of you have a little bit of a conversation, and we'll be back in a little while to kind of move us into another part of the conversation. So have a good one.
Thanks, Doug and Caitlin. So as I just mentioned, something I really value about the collaborative process is that you're able to produce these data and deliverables that are actually getting used by several different groups and not just academic scientists. And I'm curious, Kelly and Chris, as later career scientists, what do you value about collaborative science?
I can go, Chris. I see you being very polite and letting me, the latest or oldest career scientist, speak. I really agree with you, Julie. I think it really gives us the opportunity, and me the opportunity, to do work that has real world impacts and that really fills a need. I think many of us want to do work that makes a difference. For me, this is the little niche that I've found to do that. I've also really seen the benefits of it, and as a plant biologist, what I like to call a cross-pollination of ideas. So in the nice introduction she gave, Caitlin mentioned the project that we did to look at impacts of Hurricane Michael on seagrass ecosystems. For that project, we were able to leverage data that we had collected for another purpose. And it really was because we had this established relationship and this, open, trusted communication with resource managers that we found it was a need to understand the impacts of hurricanes on seagrass ecosystems in that one particular area. And so we had this relationship and this back and forth, conversation that ended up to be a really valuable output for finding out more about the system and collecting data that could help inform decision making.
Yeah, that's I value all those things too from both Kelly and Julian. I'm excited to have just a conversation here on a webinar in front of 80 plus people. This is exciting. I will add some things I like about collaborative science, but I also will say that I drank a lot of collaborative science Kool-Aid. Perhaps not enough, because I will probably mention things that I don't like about collaborative science later. So just that's a little teaser for later. But what I do like is I look at projects, like how to start projects a lot differently now. I think I kind of view it into like 3 different buckets, and this is a conversation I had with my manager about several years back, and she's got great insights on collaborative science and just how, like, what the needs are and what the applications are in general. But I look at it as like a bucket of like scientists coming together and identifying a knowledge gap. And then another bucket is like managers going, oh, this is what we need, or town officials or governments, like this is what we need to be able to inform us on what we need to do to solve this problem. And then the third bucket is like right in the middle there. It's like people, there's 2 groups talking to each other, and all these stakeholders and all these experts are talking. And I've been trying to concentrate more on that middle bucket. And that's trickier. It takes more time. It's always easier to say, oh yeah, I know what the knowledge gap is as a scientist. Let's go and write a grant for it. But I find it's more engaging, it's more rewarding, and you have products that are more used by people. And one way that we've done that at Great Bay recently is we've had a research symposium where we intentionally invite different parts of the community. So not just scientists, lots of scientists, but also managers and public and town officials, and try to get that, what I call incubation of ideas, and get these people mixed together, generate interest. Even kind of like generate these things called almost like baseball cards, where you have like, this is your strengths. My strength is like salt ecology. I have really good boating experience. I'm really looking to, my weaknesses are, I might have like some weaknesses in hydrology, looking for some people that work on this topic. So way to really just cross-pollinate, like Kelly was mentioning. So that's just one aspect that I like about collaborative science, but I'll pause because I don't want to shoot out all of them right now.
Julie, I'm interested, to hear more from you, being, very early career, if there's similarities or differences to our thoughts.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say I really like the baseball card and bucket euphemism, so thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, again, I like part of creating, I think, those deliverables for people is trying to understand how different groups think. And I think that process is really stimulating. So thinking about how to come up with something that benefits like several different groups at the same time. So you're not creating all of these different, like, you do end up having a decent amount of deliverables that are targeted, but also thinking about how you can address things with one deliverable or something like that. Just kind of that extra process of trying to, think about multiple perspectives at the same time. I think that's pretty stimulating intellectually.
And can be a fun challenge, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Any other thoughts? Chris, I know you said you had a couple more values, but we can talk about that in later questions if you want.
I was just actually thinking about what you just said. It kind of highlights just the benefits of diversity. It's like the diversity of your profession, your background, your expertise, but also how you think. You might think of problem solving in a fully different way than other people do, and having those diverse processes of thought processes are great. I mean, even ourselves, I think we think differently at different times of day. Maybe I do my best work when I'm unconscious and dreaming and try to solve a problem through dreams. So just adding all these different ways to problem solve with different people is always a good thing, but it comes with challenges, right? Because sometimes people don't learn or absorb data or stuff, the way that other people do, like the PowerPoint presentation, and maybe they're better off in a conversation. So yeah, I think about that a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris. We worked with a social scientist in the Science Collaborative project that I was talking about. And even the way that social scientists come up with research questions are different than how, an ecologist comes up with a research question. They have a whole different body of literature that they're thinking about. And just working with people like that who think about things differently can be really effective and make your project even more dynamic and useful. So another question I had is, what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that you have encountered in collaborative science, and how have you navigated them?
I have some, because I already mentioned I did. Yeah, I guess I want to start off with the easy one, the one that I think maybe everyone else would say. I'll start off with a little bit of like a curveball here. So I think it's as challenging as when you're trying to put a proposal together for an RFP, let's say for one of these two fine programs that are putting on this webinar, because you can't just do last minute, which is usually my MO. You have to really understand what the need is and what how to basically cater to that need and provide products that help with that. So you have to really have that communication with the stakeholders, whether it's a landowner or an agency that manages, wildlife, fish and wildlife, or public, abutters, and you can't do that last minute. You have to really do that through engagement and getting feedback. And so, you have to have a foresight to do that. You can't just like, oh, I'm going to block it off this week here to put this proposal together. So it is a challenge, but at the same time, I've kind of figured out some tips to get around that. And one of them is use some of these events that are really collaborative in nature anyways. Like I mentioned, we have a research symposium, and we dedicate some time for networking and for idea generation. I think that's also something that's natural at local, regional, and national conferences where you network with people. You might talk with somebody with similar expertise, different geography, that you might want to work across different states. So I feel like there's way that this happens naturally, but there could be a little bit more intent interjected into these things that we network already with.
Chris, you raise a really good point. I think that professional societies are doing a lot these days to build out, this component and others, and paying attention to and being involved in professional societies, I think, is a very beneficial thing. But Julie, to get to your question, one challenge that I found is that for successful collaboration and collaborative science, I think it really involves a lot of coordination, and it needs really one individual who's spearheading things to keep things moving along, because otherwise there's a tendency to go back into your silos and do perhaps what might be the easiest. Also, along those lines, being very efficient in communication. Nobody really wants their time wasted. We all are wearing a lot of different hats, and resource managers probably more than most. And it comes down to minutes and hours spent. 9 times out of 10, when I reach out to a resource manager inquiring about collaborating or developing a proposal or something, I'll get the question, well, how much time do you think? How much time would I be spending on this? And they're really looking for a number of hours, I found, because they need to roll that up the chain and see if they get permission to do this, and they're already very busy schedules. So being very aware that not only the time involved by one person for coordination, but everybody's time, so that it really is doable. What I found that helps is creating very detailed agendas for meetings, so everybody knows what is involved and what it should look like coming prepared to that meeting, and having enough time in the agenda for good conversation, but not too much time, so that we spend all our time on one topic and don't get to everything. And it really is a fine balance. And I only learned it through trial and immense error. And, you know, sometimes leaving meetings feeling embarrassed that we only got through half when I was the one who was, you know, in charge of getting us through the entire meeting. I, though, you know, thought that I needed some help. And so I took some courses. I took a facilitation training course offered by NOAA, which was absolutely fantastic, and talked about developing a process agenda, which is a lot of work, you know, ahead of time, but really helps keep things moving along smoothly.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a common theme here for challenges, and that's the time that it takes to foster these collaborations. And Chris and Kelly, those are some really good suggestions of how to overcome that challenge. Yeah, I've had that issue also in my, you know, limited experience, just trying to get all of these really busy, important people in a room, because that's where collaborative research is most beneficial, is when you have all of these different people together talking about things. But yeah, it's really hard to get folks into a room, and Chris and Kelly kind of described some of the methods for doing that, which is super helpful. Like clearly outlining expectations when asking people to be a part of your project. Yeah, so that's great. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the opportunities, and I think kind of segueing off what I just said, I can start. So getting people into a room is super helpful. And one recent example I have of this is we were doing some focus groups up in Oregon to understand what folks value about estuaries and estuarine restoration, as I mentioned. And we were looking, we had these pictures that we put out on the table to generate discussion. And one of the pictures was dairy cows in a marsh in Oregon. And I had a dairy farmer in the group, and a super avid environmentalist in the group as well. And the dairy farmer was the first to say, "Hey, like cows don't belong in the marsh. What is this? This isn't okay." And the avid environmentalist like really responded to that. He's like, I didn't think you would say that. You're a dairy farmer, you know." And they connected on that point. So I think those moments are really special, like when you're able to make them happen. And I was curious if Chris and Kelly had other moments like that where you have these, you know, different personalities and different perspectives in a room, and anything that came out of that, or any other, you know, opportunities in general that collaborative research provides.
Yeah, I find myself, Julie, thinking about, you know, the definition of a room and how that's changed in recent years. You know, we're spread all across the country now, but we're in one virtual room. In some ways, that's made things a lot easier, right? To get folks talking from different systems, and people who may not have the resources to travel in person to rooms. I see a lot of benefits to people getting in the same, you know, physical space for reasons that you mentioned. Perhaps, you know, that interaction wouldn't have happened virtually because, you know, things are always maybe a little more awkward when you're talking virtually than when you're all in the same room together. But I think, you know, what we've learned over the past few years has in some ways made things a lot easier, and has been a good opportunity potentially to make connections that you might not otherwise would have made. I, for example, having, you know, been on some webinars, watching webinars, or virtual meetings, see a name in a list, for example, and recognize the name from a paper I've read or that I've cited, or they do work that I find interesting. I, on a certain number of occasions, have emailed them and said, "Hey, I noticed you in this meeting. Would you be interested in chatting?" I think that's giving us good opportunities to expand our network and maybe make connections otherwise we wouldn't have.
Yeah, that all really resonates with me too. Just kind of thinking about, you know, getting different people in the room. It's this old saying, like, it takes a village. Just thinking, like, you know, maybe we just need like village people. We just need like different areas of the public and different professions. And I feel like in New Hampshire, we're like a little bit of it's like a little bit of a pandemic of collaborative people here. And one of my colleague agencies under the National Estuary Partnership, which is under the EPA umbrella, they just put on a state of the estuaries for our estuary, and we're a big part of that. And he did a great job of bringing in different parts of the public, which I never even thought about. Like we had a guest speaker that won awards for a restaurant that's bringing local foods to this restaurant table, and really making that an emphasis, like not importing stuff in, and how that impacts the estuary and how they value the estuary. We also had like a poet laureate in there. We had all these different people in there, and it definitely was, it takes a village type of mentality to understand the problem and address it and fix it. So yeah, just thinking outside the box and getting different people in there and breaking down silos. I know I'm talking more about generalities here, but I guess I'm a little bit inspired. So I'm thinking like beyond my sphere of projects.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think we have time for one more little topic. So I'm currently finishing up my PhD, and my experience with collaborative research has definitely impacted the jobs that I'm applying for now. Like I'm less interested in straight research track positions, and I'm finding myself drawn more to positions that work collaboratively across stakeholder groups. So I was wondering, Kelly and Chris, how participation in collaborative science projects have impacted your career trajectories.
Can I first kick it back to you and see like where that might lead you?
That's a good question. I'm pretty open at this point. I feel like I'm lucky in that at this point in time, there's a lot of options along the spectrum from science to more stakeholder collaborative positions. So I don't really have to choose between, but there's something called a extension specialist position in several agencies that do that kind of work. So I've been looking at those, and postdocs doing projects that work collaboratively, things like that.
Yeah, that sounds like a great different pathway. And it seems like there's more like morphing of professions. It's awesome to see that. And I'm also interested in hearing how like where Kelly thinks she's going to be leading towards in the future too.
Yeah, I can start by saying that I didn't really think I'd be where I am now. I, always envisioned that I would be in academia, and that was a goal of mine. But in terms of having administrative and leadership roles, I kind of always saw myself out on the boat every day, snorkeling and diving in seagrass meadows, and not necessarily spending a lot of my time in an office directing a funding program, a research grants program, or even being the interim director of a marine lab. But one thing that I can say is the work that I've done in collaborative science really has been very beneficial, because at the core of all of these things is really person-to-person skills. So building people skills. I first thought directing a marine lab was a lot of facilities, and that is a large part of it, and strategic initiatives and thinking about the future and large partnerships. And while that's a big part of it, another big part of it is supporting the people who work at the lab and making sure that they have the resources they need, and listening to and hearing from them about what is working and what's not working. And in a way, it's, akin to collaborative science, or working with any collaborator that you would work with, hearing these different perspectives, which may be different from my own, but recognizing that they're very valid. And by thinking about things from my perspective and their perspective, which is something that we've talked about here today, we really can think about innovative solutions. So in terms of where I'll go next, I don't know. Time will tell, I guess. I'm similar to you, Julie. The world is wide open, and that's a good place to be, I think. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, I guess I am a little bit more similar in the same metaphorical and literal boat that you're join. I do some work in seagrass beds too and snorkeling beds, and we should definitely connect after this because there's like some questions I wanted to ask you. In terms of position, I don't really see like a shift in position as much as I see like a shift in how I approach projects. The only way I would shift, I'm really happy in the position here. The geography is a little bit sad just because of climate change, and I'm a big fan of snow, and we're losing our winters on both ends. So if there's another NERRS that pops up in maybe British Columbia, Doug, I know it's not in this country, but it's sandwiched between, you know, Alaska and Seattle or Washington State. So that'd be the only shift I would be looking to do, like in terms of a position. But in terms of approach, now it's like my eyes have been almost like peeled open. It's almost like if I got to carpentry like 15 years ago, and now I look at people's houses different. It's always, I always look at like the detail work and science. I look at science differently. Like the collaborative science is always there. We just never really looked at it as much. Now I focus on it. So I do projects very differently now because of it. So I think that's the big shift for me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Chris and Kelly. That was really cool to hear your perspectives on everything. I think Doug is here now to transition us to the audience Q&A section. But thanks so much for your thoughts, guys. It was nice talking with you.
Well, yeah, thank you for that really great conversation. And I want to respond to Chris. Yeah, British Columbia is not exactly in our NERRS plan. I'll look into it for you though. Let's talk about carpentry though. Let's do that. So yeah, to the audience, Caitlin and I would love to entertain your questions and pass them on to the panelists to get their thoughts on your thoughts. So if you have something that you've been holding on to that you wanted to ask, please put it in the chat and it'll get to us to ask. And we've got a couple things rolling in, so so I think I might grab one of them and get you talking as the rest of you start thinking of things to ask. So the question comes, do you have examples of collaborating with storytellers and artists to help share your research with communities and non-scientists? And the connection of that is, do you have ideas on how artists and storytellers can collaborate with scientists?
That is a great question. I'll jump in first real quick. I love that question. I'm not an artist. I like to think I was maybe when I was a lot younger. But there's a couple of ways that are simple ways I saw this happen. One way is the best actual figure I've ever seen in a peer-reviewed journal article was an artist kind of drawing a figure out and representing different species compositions and quantities in different habitats that are monitored in like oyster reefs, oyster farms, seagrass beds, and mud flats, and showing like lots of cunners over here and like more diversity of fish. That kind of spoke volumes. I'll never forget that figure, and I've forgotten so many other scientific figures. That one will never be forgotten. And another, I guess, quick way that I've seen this happen is logo. Like some projects have logos to help brand and recognize that those projects immediately. And one of the logo projects I've been involved in is an artist drew a seagrass bed as our logo.
I love that. And I love the idea, but I haven't had any experience with that. I have been thinking about it though. Here at GCRL's Marine Education Center on display, we have a piece of art from a local artist that is made up of trash collected from our beaches. And to me, that's just so poignant. And using that to reach the public and really illustrate that what we're doing and what we're leaving behind on our beaches accumulates to be a lot. And then as a very visual, albeit very pretty reminder of the impact that we have. But definitely an area where I see great opportunity.
Yeah, I think storytelling and art have a huge place in collaborative science. I guess one example from my experience is in the project up in Oregon, we developed a brochure meant for local community members, and the NERRS Science Collaborative team designers helped us to do this. It was very visual, there was diagrams and lots of pictures, and we took the information that we gained from focus groups about what people really care about estuaries and tried to make visual connections, showing how what scientists actually measure when they measure the progress of restoration projects is actually directly related to what people care about and what they said they cared about in focus groups. So art and visual diagrams and those kinds of depictions, I think, are really important in getting points across to groups that may be less technical.
And actually, one thing Kelly just mentioned reminded me of a partner, NERRS, in Texas that used marine debris, old washed up plastic towels that would be shaped by the ocean, so to speak, as the artist, and use those to raise money and awareness about marine debris in that area. I think if you Google, John Oliver and I don't know, maybe Mission Aransas, Texas, you could find a really expletively filled video that showcases this.
Thanks for that. I had forgotten about that very odd doll occurrence in Texas, but yes, it made national news, I suppose. Kelly, you mentioned earlier a course that you took through NOAA, a facilitation course, and how that benefited you in your collaborative science. Can you speak more about that? And then maybe to all of you, what types of trainings have you sought out to help you do collaborative science?
Yeah, so I think it was the NOAA Facilitations Basics course. And I took it virtual, I think, because it was during the time of where everybody was staying at home. And the course really, covered how to be a facilitator for a meeting, but also how to lead a meeting, the prep required, before a meeting to make it go as smooth as possible during the meeting, and then post-meeting, engaging with meeting participants. And it really was extremely, extremely valuable. And it was offered through your program, Caitlin, which was fantastic. And I have since seen it offered in many different avenues. So I'm always a big proponent of training. And I think that one certainly was a good use of my time. But I'm interested to hear from Chris and Julie if they have others that I could even I can take notes on.
Right. Yeah. Ironically, I have a tough time with being engaged through collaborative training virtually, but in person. Maybe because we just came out of a pandemic, everything is virtually. But maybe through osmosis of working with people that have been doing collaborative science for so long, and that was huge for me, working with them on these projects that were different and interdisciplinary. For sure. And then this is a quick shameless plug, not for me, but for Science Collaborative. If you are on a Science Collaborative project, it comes with collaborative network of events that you get to learn about how other people approach collaborative issues like we're talking about now, and what they love about it, and what some tools and tips and tricks are. So I really enjoy that too. And yeah, and I'd love to hear if Julie has anything to add too.
Yeah, another plug for the Davidson Fellowship. You get access to tons and tons of really awesome trainings through NOAA. They're just so well thought out and so effective. Despite being mostly virtual, you interact very, very interactive. They're super fun, and you learn a lot. One in particular, we had for the Davidson Fellowship, we had a collaborative science training that took course of 2 weeks, and that was super beneficial, just learning all of the theory and learning about the whole world of literature devoted to collaborative science was really cool. And I took a couple of other trainings throughout my time as a Davidson Fellow too that were helpful. I took the Facilitation Basics course that Kelly was talking about, also really great. Yeah, so NOAA has really good trainings. That's my point.
Promise we didn't pay them to say that. We put the link to that facilitation training for coastal managers is in the chat now. I think we have barely time to just do a quick lightning round. But we really want to ask this question. So the whole question, as I've advanced in my career, it's become clear to me that if I want to do the research, academia is the best place. So here's the key. How do you navigate any potential mismatch between traditional tenure metrics, such as papers, and doing collaborative or co-production of science? So really quickly, Kelly and then Chris, if you could just, a mismatch between tenure and co-production collaborative science approaches.
You know, I've approached that as an open communication, saying, look, I find value, and this is with department chairs and department heads, I find value in this, and these are all of the reasons. This is the grant funding that is coming in. The number of papers that result from this will be the same, but they may be delayed some because of the time. And I found that in approaching that respectfully, but also with numbers that could be used, you know, for evaluation, has been very helpful. And that, at least at my university, the leadership has been very receptive to that.
Yeah, this is a great question. That's a great answer, Kelly. I guess real quick, I try to strike a balance. You know, I was in academia, and now I'm in the NOAA umbrella under the NERRS system. And, you know, I did shift a lot of my time from, you know, literature review to crunching, you know, data analysis into churning out, you know, papers, to more like organizing symposiums and work groups. And now I'm trying to, like, I feel like I've overshifted a little bit, so I want to shift a little bit back in the middle and dedicate some time for, like, maybe just once a week I just read papers, and maybe you can do that, you know, collaboratively by doing a journal club with some of your colleagues, or you can have, like, I guess, set time aside for like writing. Just, I've never done that with people, but I've struggled really to write manuscripts in the last couple of years, not because I don't have the content in the projects, just because the time, because time is just, you know, it's such a precious resource. So finding the balance is all I can really kind of point towards.
All right, well, thank you for that. We are a minute down to the end. Caitlin, is there anything that you want to add to our closeout?
I just want to say thank you, and I think to Chris's last point, we've unfortunately run out of time here. I feel like this conversation could go on much longer, but it's been really great to hear you all and your experiences. I think our next steps, we have a little survey that we're asking folks to fill out at the end here. I think that Nick's going to put that up for us.
Yeah, I'm just echoing Caitlin's thank you to everybody. Thanks to the audience for sticking with us. This is a different format for us to just to have conversation like this, and so really hope that you enjoyed it. And Nick, bring us home in that 30 seconds that's left on my clock, at least on the West Coast.
Well, I'm not even going to try to top any of your last comments there, because it just won't be as good, but I just will make one more shameless plug for the survey. So please do take the exit survey. We do read the comments. It helps us kind of develop where we should go with these webinars, and it gives you a chance to, you know, say what you might like to learn more about from this kind of webinar. So the survey will pop up automatically when you exit the session. It'll also go out automatically in tomorrow's reminder email, and it'll also have the link to the resource. The video won't be posted right away. It takes us a couple days to edit usually, but you can kind of look for it there over the next couple days. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone.